Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our webinar. Thanks for joining the final one in our Digital Week series. Smart mobility is the topic for today. What will future mobility look like? When will the future even start? How will it impact our lives and our traditional businesses? My name is Friederike Reder and I'm very happy and very curious to discuss these topics with Professor Andreas Herrmann. Andreas is a professor at our Institute for Customer Insight and also visiting professor at the London School of Economics. Before we start, just my usual 2 remarks. We will take this session and send you the link along with the slides next week. Also, please send us your questions anytime during the webinar by using the F&A or Q&A field in your Zoom program, and we'll discuss these after the presentation. The presentation will last around 30 minutes. So now I would like to welcome Andreas. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I wish you an insightful lunch break.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and talk with you about the future of mobility, about potential avenues for changing traffic, from transform actual traffic situations into a kind of a smart solution. Before we head into today's presentation, let me confess that I'm in the midst of a storm, because I got the opportunity to share some ideas about giving up private car ownership this morning in NZZ, and I got a lot of feedback, a lot of responses, and having read some of the comments, I got the impression that the future of human mankind depends very much on car ownership. So that brings me to the idea, asking you and running a poll here, what is your understanding about private car ownership? Would you be willing to give up car ownership and using instead a fleet of different types of products, different types of cars, different types of brands, which is stationed nearby your neighborhood, in your quarter, so that you have immediate access. You can do reservation via app and use also modern technology. So while answering, or while waiting for your answers, let me start off by asking somebody who knows a lot about cars. It's Henry Ford, and he has invented basically the car. And now I need a little help because my slide presentation got stuck here.
No worries.
That can happen in a live sequence. Okay, here we are. Yeah, here he is. Imagine we were able to materialize Henry Ford, show him our streets, our cities, our cars. How would his reaction be? Here's a guess. Maybe he would come up with the following statement. What the hell have you been doing in the last 130 years? Cars haven't changed much. They look pretty similar, and even more importantly, the way we use cars, the way we perceive individual mobility hasn't changed much. Man purchases cars and man uses cars. That's basically it. This kind of business model wasn't modified along all those years. But since a couple of years, we have been observing basically 2 trends. One trend is triggered by companies such as Uber and Lyft, telling us there is no need to purchase cars. There's no need for ownership. We can simply share cars, and you can do ride-hailing, car sharing, and all those models which are out there. The second dimension is initiated by all those tech companies, telling us, well, we can shift driving tasks from the human to the machine. So we move all the way up from level 1 autonomy and up all the way to level 5 autonomy, meaning the more and more driving tasks are handed over from the human to the machine. And by combining these 2 trends, we basically end up with something, I just want to mention it, Uber 2.0, meaning electric vehicles belonging to a fleet, almost autonomous, managed by a traffic management control center, ordered via app, operating in a limited environment. And when we look out what happens in the streets, we see more than 100 projects worldwide. Here's just an example from Florida. It's a huge residential area. It's mainly for elderly people spending winter times in Florida, and these people come from the northern part of the United States or even from Canada. And in this limited area, you find a lot of those autonomous vehicles, and people are happy. Traffic runs smoothly, and that's a typical application for those technologies. So limited space, limited operations, and people who comply with traffic rules. That's also very important when we try to establish those technologies. Before we dig deeper and get an understanding how we can translate those technologies to improve traffic situations, let me share some data. Sometimes it's helpful to talk or to discuss based on some data. You probably all of you know that we have more than 1 billion cars on Earth in operation, driving up to 16 trillion kilometers a year. That's a huge amount. Every car is on average almost an hour in use per 24 hours. And we all together spend 400 billion hours behind the steering wheel. That's the reason why Netflix, Google, Amazon, all those companies are really keen getting into the autonomous driving market, because it's a huge amount of hours which can be used for entertaining, for working on PowerPoint presentation, and anything else. The problem is that the seat utilization is extremely low. Occupancy is on average 1.5, 1.6 persons in a car, and that leads to a seat utilization of 1.1, 1.2%. So if this was a railway company or an airline company, bankruptcy would be the natural consequences, having such a low seat utilization. So the efficiency is extremely low. We spend a lot of space out there. It's 24 million soccer fields, which we need for parking all those seats. You probably know that we have to complain a lot of fatalities every year, more than 1 million, and increasing number in South America, Africa, Asia, not necessarily here in Switzerland or Central Europe. And many million people suffering from injury. And finally, that's a data point which is very often ignored, that roughly 7% of the population suffer from severe disabilities, meaning, at least outside Switzerland, no access to mobility. So I think there is enough reason to rethink mobility from the scratch, to come up with a question if this is the way we want to organize traffic. One way which I would like to pursue a little bit is to think about autonomous systems. And first argument why we need to hand over more and more driving tasks from the human to the machine is life, protecting life. More than 90%, 95% of all accidents can be attributed to human failure. So people are on drugs, people are drunk, people turn their attention to the kids on the back seat, people interact, play with a cell phone and do anything else but driving. And more and more cities come into play arguing we want to drive down fatalities. Los Angeles has announced Vision Zero, Copenhagen is coming up, Paris, many other cities arguing we want to have safe streets within the next 5 years. So there will be pressure on manufacturers coming from cities all over the globe. A second argument is time. Normally people overreact when driving. So people brake too harsh and they accelerate too heavily. And by using technology, especially this vehicle-to-vehicle communication, we can smooth down traffic situations. And the experiences in the streets of Ann Arbor and some other places show that the throughput can be increased substantially, up to 300% in some specific traffic situations. A third argument is energy consumption. So think about the following situation. An autonomous car approaches a traffic light, and this traffic light switches from green to red. So this car can be put on a glide path, so it can be it can be stopped down very, very smoothly. And once it appears at a traffic light, so the light switches from red to green again, it can be put on the acceleration path. And if we had such technology already in the streets, there are simulations for Germany that we could easily save up to 900 million liters of fuel every year. So that's a tremendous potential for reducing energy consumption and reducing emissions. A fourth argument is space. Here is an example from the US that 2 billion parking spaces are necessary. That's twice the area of the state of Delaware. Overall, we know that 30 up to 40% of the space in the city is needed for managing traffic. And this space can be regained for the people, for pedestrian areas, for offices, for parks, for playgrounds, for anything else but traffic. So there is a chance to use technology in order to improve the life of the people. Here is just some calculations. Let's go back to a study published by Morgan Stanley for the US market, telling us that if we were able to reduce the amount of fuel by 30%, we would gain more than 150 billion US dollar. And the same for the reduction of casualties, almost 500 billion US dollar. And this adds up to 600-700 billion. I'm sharing this number because we are talking here about a significant amount of GDP, which we have in our hands when we are able to think about traffic differently. So it's a big number which can be tackled here by rethinking traffic. So how can we do that? Here are some presentations from very different cities. We did a study covering 38 cities around the world, and what you see here, these dotted points are tails of 1 square kilometers, and these tails represent different areas. So one color is recreation areas, one other color is residential areas, another color is offices and shops and things like that. And what you can see that these grids or these urban patterns vary tremendously across different types of cities. So for example, these car-centric cities or giants in North America, they have a pattern as displayed in the upper left corner. We have a high density center and very dispersed neighborhoods, very scattered neighborhoods. And you can immediately see that a railway system might not be the best answer to this kind of city. So we have to think differently. I will come to potential solutions in a minute. If we take, for example, Vienna, Berlin, Montreal, they show a totally different grid, very compact, very centered, and that gives room or space for totally different types of mobility. Whereas London, San Francisco, these cities are characterized by different hubs, medium density hubs, but life takes place within those hubs. So there's not much traffic or much correspondence or communications between those hubs, and that gives room or gives ideas for different types of traffic which can be organized in such environments. Mega cities such as Shanghai, New York, Sao Paulo, with tremendous growth rates, show different patterns, and that will lead to very different types of mobility which can be put in place here. We collected data from 38 cities around the world, and we did simulations based on the following modes of transportation and the following key performance indicators. As you can see on left side, you see 8 different types of mobility. And the idea was, based on the current traffic situations, we want to implement new types of mobility. So robopods, small autonomous vehicles, all the way down to robo shuttles. These are mini buses covering more than 10, 12, up to 15 persons, including micro mobility, which is a big issue, as you know, in Scandinavian cities. And the question was, how does the implementation of those technologies impact key performance indicators such as road death, transportation cost, traffic volume? Because at the end of the day, as I was explaining earlier, we have the intention to make traffic more efficient, to organize traffic situations more efficiently, and bring back space to people, organize a city around people, not around cars, what we have done in the past. Here's just an overview. I do not want to torture you with any technical or mathematical or statistical details. It's just a top management overview. And on the left side, you see different strategies. And for example, a shift from private cars to non-AV mode, that means a shift from private cars to public transportations, seems to be a good solution, for example, for Berlin, Vienna. Why is this the case? Because those cities already have well-established, well-functioning public transportation, public railway system. And it doesn't make much sense to come up with robo-shuttles, because it would lead to cannibalizations. But another strategy could be to bring in robo-shuttles, so strong push of robo-shuttles. That would help in London, Mexico City, Shanghai, because those robo-shuttles would be able to reduce traffic volume, to reduce fatalities in the streets, reduce transportation costs, reduce energy consumption, and reduce journey time. So depending on the structure of the city, on the grid, on the urban pattern, one strategy might be useful, whereas the other strategy does not help much. And I think here's another interesting finding. It's the implementation of micromobility. We have cities such as Mexico City with a configuration consisting of very different hubs, but these hubs are, I don't want to say isolated, but people live within their hubs. So these cities are characterized by a lot of short distance trips. And short distance trips can be easily covered by micromobility. So public transportation does not help much here. Also, autonomous shuttles, micromobility could be the solution to some of the traffic problems these cities are exposed to. So the bottom line is there's no simple answer. We have a certain assortment of modes of transportations, all the way down to autonomous driving vehicles. But we need to combine all these modes of transportation to think in terms of intermodality and find the right combination in order to improve the traffic situations in cities. If you are interested in those topics and in many more topics which are related to smart driving, I would inform you about a executive education program which we are about to set up. It will start in May. It consists of 15 days, 3 weeks, one in May, the other in June, and another one in October. And I think we have recruited high caliber speakers from all different areas around new mobility and smart mobility to develop this idea forward and to make Switzerland to a hub of new mobility ideas and the development of new mobility concepts. I would like to wrap up here and invite questions. We can easily run into any discussions. Thanks for joining me this morning, and I'm really looking forward on your comments and ideas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andreas. I'll just stop the screen sharing. This was very insightful. We have the first questions. I think we have time for discussion, so please send us more questions. I'll just start from the top. By how much could we reduce traffic jams in fully automated mobility environments?
Well, it depends a lot on the assumptions. I was involved in projects in the United States where we were able to reduce congestion or improve throughput. That's the opposite side, basically improve throughput by up to 500%. That has mainly to do with car-to-car communications. So making traffic smooth, that's key here, because as I was saying, congestion is in many cases initiated by bad driving habits. People react too hectically. They react too harsh on specific situations, and these reactions could trigger congestion.
Thank you. And which countries are moving fastest in this area?
Yeah, we do see labs for new mobility. In Singapore, for example, Singapore considers itself as a lab for autonomous driving. We see a lot of activity going on in Israel. Israel has around 600 startups, technology companies dealing with autonomous mobility. We see Finland and some other countries, but not necessarily the countries hosting the traditional manufacturers. So the incumbents, cities or countries with incumbents are not really pushing forward. That has something to do with the idea of the incumbents to calm down activities because they want to protect their traditional business model as long as possible.
What do we need to change first, city design or mobility design?
That goes hand in hand. I do see a lot of collaboration at my other position in London with many cities around the globe that architects try to bring in new mobility, for example, autonomous mobility, meaning cars enter the inner part of the cities, but they park outside. So that opens up immediately new ideas for creating pedestrian areas. So these developments basically go hand in hand.
Thank you. Assuming that there will remain conventional private cars for many more years, how do you practically see the transfer to a world of autonomous cars?
Well, at the end of the day, I'm not sure if we can convince people. We have to use sticks and carrots. Otherwise, it will not work. And I'm pretty confident that we will see within the next 5 years, especially Scandinavian countries, forbidding privately owned cars entering inner cities. For example, Copenhagen is reducing the amount of parking space every year by 5%. And Stockholm is following this policy also. And it would not surprise me that in a few years we will see shuttles entering the inner part of the city. We will have parking lots outside where people can change from private cars into those autonomous shuttles. There's a lot of activities and planning going on.
How do you see the future of parking? Just talking about mobility.
The future of parking is exciting. There are a lot of projects all over the globe trying to use parking assistance. That means we stop, basically use our cell phone and advise and give a command that the car finds its place in the parking area by itself. And that allows us to reduce the amount of space significantly. We do not need any stairways in parking facilities. We can reduce the space of the parking lots because the machine is better able to park a car than humans. So that can free up space by 30–40%, and this space can be used for anything else and basically give it back to the pedestrians and to the people of the city.
Mm-hmm. Thank Really many questions are coming in.
Okay.
Thank you for those. Where do you see the biggest and easiest problems to be solved, the low-hanging fruit, so to say?
So low-hanging fruit is a vehicle to infrastructure communications. So for example, we can easily implement smart parking. That means every parking spot gives a signal to a traffic management center, I'm free or I'm occupied. And this information can be given to the incoming traffic, so that no circulation is necessary. We know from many studies that in inner cities, 30–40% of the traffic is in search for parking. That can be easily solved by using a technology which helps people finding those parking spots directly. Actually, here in St. Gallen, we are about to implement such a system. Progress is on the way.
And is Switzerland the right place for mobility innovation? Do we have a specific advantage in the mobility innovation race for Switzerland? And maybe also your view in Germany, as we have many German viewers as well.
Yes and no. Yes, because we have great technical universities. We have no history in automotive industry. And we are a great place to live, so we can attract the best brains, the best minds of the world. That's the yes part. The no part is that I do a lot of piecemeal activities. So this canton implements a autonomous bus on a 3-kilometer track. Then the other canton comes up, oh, I want to have the same technology. So there's no overall solution. So we have all those nitty-gritty activities going on. Every mayor in Switzerland would like to have an autonomous bus, but that's not a solution. We need to have a test field covering highway, covering inner city traffic, covering also logistic traffic. And so we need a big solution, and that's easier in other regimes such as Israel or China. So we need here a lot of debate, a lot of communications, a lot of convincing, and I've involved in those issues since a very long time, and I have to confess I'm getting a little tired.
How much would need to be invested to change towards such concepts here and in other places?
It's heavy investment. That's why I came up with a case. We can save 3, 4, 5, 6% of GDP when we change mobility. But that's a huge amount of money, and because on the other side we need a huge amount of money to invest in infrastructure and to change the cars. We need software, we need processing units, we need sensors. That's not nothing. That's heavy investment. But I think at the end of the day, without being able to give a clear-cut calculation here, we should be better off, especially. We will gain quality of life, and I think that's very important.
Here's a more technical question. Which technology will be key to implement AV into megacities?
Well, there's a big debate going on. Do we need to have the intelligence in the infrastructure or in the car? And I would say let's do as much intelligence in cars as possible. So that means as much sensors as possible, as much processing units as possible, because investments in infrastructure are heavy and they take a lot of time. So I would suggest try to have sophisticated cars in terms of autonomous technology, and then we are already down the road. So we can easily implement autonomous driving in quarters here in Switzerland, in Germany, in many cities. I would like to start with the least complex traffic situations. That means a kind of a living area where we have only pedestrians and not many crossroads. But from there, we can stepwise increase the complexity, because algorithms need to learn, traffic management centers need to make experiences. So it's not something which we implement from one day to the next. It's a kind of a stepwise procedure which goes over a certain period of time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
how willing are people in Switzerland, above all Germany, to actually give up owning a private car? After all,
Yeah.
Germany, for example, is a country still very focused on car ownership, status aligned. They won't even succumb to a speed limit. And maybe together with that questions, which incentive systems would you see to change our behavior?
Yeah, that's an issue which I learned today. As I was saying at the very beginning, I really earned a storm this morning suggesting giving up private car ownership in Switzerland.
That's not even Germany.
No, yeah, it might be even worse in Germany. Well, at the end of the day, that's a success story of the automotive industry, because the auto industry was able to connect emotions, feelings, with cars, and that's why it is so difficult to give up. It's not an easy job to say, hey, at the end of the day, we need to go from A to B efficiently without having all these emotional components in a car. So I really do see the human factor as a tremendous hurdle for implementing these smart mobility concepts. And so we might come to the conclusion that we need to have tax incentives, that we need to have regulations, as we see in some other countries, just to help people maybe making this move. And there's one important aspect also connected with this question. I do not feel the consequences of my behavior. Look, if I take the bus or the railways today or my car, it does not affect climate change. So that means my mobility behavior is not directly related to consequences, or the consequences are so small that I do not feel them. And that's a difficult environment for human learning. Normally, we always argue you need to connect behavior with consequences, otherwise it's very difficult. So bottom line, regulations, tax incentives, I think that's the only instruments which work.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think can we change the city planning from transportation bias based to population based?
Yes. If we take the post-war history, we see that cities have been built around cars. The streets dominate the face of the city, and if we turn this back, that opens up a new space for creativity and new ideas. We can organize cities totally differently. We can come up with new ideas for city planning. I'm not an architect, but I've seen many of those concepts for parts of Shanghai, for example, for Mexico City. So it's a new way how architects and city planners can think about the future of living in the inner part of cities.
So are there any shining examples of cities that have really changed? Or
I'm pretty sure that we will see a lot of these change taking place in Asia, especially in China, because due to the political system, it's easy to implement those changes. But these cities see that, or at least that what I observe in communicating with these municipalities, that changing the quality of life can be a competitive edge when it comes to attracting companies, attracting people, and some of these cities already noticed, hey, we need to change in order to be attractive in the future.
Thank you. Getting more to the players, who are the key drivers of smart mobility here in Switzerland, and what are their initiatives? Do you have examples there?
We do not have many. We do have a couple of spin-offs at ETH Zurich, for example, mainly dealing with autonomous driving, with processing technology. But the huge players in these fields are, I would say, mainly based in Israel and in California. Mobileye, for example, a company offering the whole set of software processing units and connecting these devices with the hardware. So we are in Switzerland not in a phase that we have big players. which are already in a situation that they can really capitalize their investment. We are still in a kind of first phase, in a starting phase, in a launching phase, but not necessarily in an industrial phase.
Thank you. Talking about big players, which OEM is prepared best for the smart mobility future?
Well, the OEMs do not really like this development because, look, OEMs have been successful within the last 50, 60 years, tremendously. Their business model was so successful that they earned a hell of a lot of money. And the business model is based on the rule, man purchases a car and man drives the car. So any change within the business model brings in new competition. As we see, many tech companies, including Google, including Apple, many others, already entered the car market, and the incumbents do not want to see that. So there's no incentive, no pressure to push this technology forward. In addition, car manufacturers are used to sell products. They're not used to offer mobility as a service, for example. They're not used to set up kind of sharing models. All these initiatives did not really take off. We saw some of them in Germany and some other markets, but they really did not take off. That might have to do with the reluctance of the consumers. That's definitely one issue, but it might have also something to do that these companies are not yet they do not have the culture to offer services. They are used to sell something.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's a bit of a different question. How can a future mobility company collaborate with your efforts? I guess the best is to get in touch with you personally.
At universities, we are not creating those wonderful products or services or whatever. We try to help finding the right avenue and to make sure that the competitive advantage plays a role, because we are talking here about competition of nations, because the value chain is disrupted in this industry, and a lot of new countries come up to pick part of this huge value chain. The mobility market is probably the third largest market worldwide, the third largest single market worldwide. So we are really talking about trillions. And the question is, what can we keep here, or what do we lose to all those upcoming countries such as Singapore, for example, which plays in the meantime a tremendous role in bringing autonomous driving onto the streets.
Question about your role in St. Gallen, or our university's role. Do you want to set up a project with the city or OEM, or set up a platform to encourage partners start setting up projects, or mainly support that with research?
Yes, that's definitely part of our business. We are already involved in those projects, but I'm really happy entering in any sort of collaboration to bring this idea forward, because I still believe that we need to change, that we need to give guidelines, and that we can help politicians to ease the path for this new mobility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, two more questions about initiatives in Switzerland. What do you think about the, I don't know how to pronounce this, EVTOL transportation in Switzerland? Do you know what that is?
No, I don't know what this is.
So please refine in the questions, and we can get back to that.
Yeah, but as said earlier, there are a lot of initiatives in Switzerland, and the problem is there's no roof for all those initiatives. So I'm sure I do not know everything what's going on.
Good. Are you aware of Swiss Loop? Another question.
Yeah,
what's your view on that?
That's another initiative which should help improving the efficiency of cargo transportation. Mm-hmm. I think that can help. I'm not a technician, so I'm not in a position to evaluate the feasibility of such a project. But I think any activity helping changing the mobility pattern as we experience this today might be helpful. We are still in a phase where we have a competition about labs which country is the right lab. And as I mentioned earlier, Singapore is actually claiming we are the lab of autonomous driving. And so my idea is, or my wish would be that we can say at some point Switzerland is the lab for something dealing with or having to do with new mobility.
Thank you. Is a different angle. All these projects are based on a huge amount of data. Who will handle and manage this data in the future? What are the threats when these data comes into the hands of governments, and will they undermine such projects because of political ideology?
Yeah, that's a big question and a big battle. Who owns the data? If you ask a manufacturer, the answer is clear. The OEM owns the data. If you ask Google, Google says, hey, I'm the data host, and the manufacturer just provides some tires for a rolling laptop, basically. Or an insurance company also play a role here, so they want to have access to data. One solution could be that we find kind of a neutral host, and the different players have access to those data sets. But the race is still on. There's no final decision made. We have to be reminded that data plays a critical role here, that security issues play a role here. But at the end of the day, we need to be aware that there's no total security. I attended a hacker conference in Israel, and these people were able to interfere in cars on the streets in the United States. So because a car is a kind of an open system, we have many interactions with the outside world, communication, for example, navigation. Those are many entry points for people who should not be in a car. Right?
That's an interesting perspective there.
Yeah, that's definitely an issue which we still have to work on and elaborate further.
Thank you. I'll finish with last question about your course. Will the executive education course be held in German or English? And what is the target group? And what is the latest possible date to register?
Yes, it's in German. We start week 1 here in Switzerland, in St. Gallen. Week 2 in June is in Munich. And the week in October will be again in St. Gallen. Registration is on the homepage. I don't know the exact date, but there's still time for registration. And the target group are people who are about to change mobility. They can be somebody at an OEM, there can be somebody working from a municipality, for a railway company. There are many domains, and if I consider the applications which we have obtained so far, we have people from very different fields, including startup companies, tech companies, interested in finding concepts, how to translate technology into business models. That's also a very important issue which we will touch in those courses.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Andreas.
you. It was a pleasure.
There were many questions. It was a great session.
Thank you for guiding me through.
Thank you so much for all your questions and viewing the webinar and staying with us for the whole week. Some of you did that, so that's especially great to see. Do you have any final remarks or anything to add? Let's do it. let's do it. Don't be hesitant. I think it's a chance of our lifetime to get this industry on the streets and to benefit from this huge market of mobility and to make life better for the people. That's it. Thank you. And I guess if you have any more questions, get in touch with Andreas or with me. We'll also put some material in the follow-up email. We'll send you the follow-up next week. So yes, and a final announcement. We have put together a very short-term webinar which is taking place tomorrow at 10 about the legal implications of the coronavirus crisis. So if you live in Switzerland or are connected to the Swiss legal area, please join if these are for interest for you. And visit our website to register. Thank you very much for attending. Bye-bye. And thank you, Andreas. Thank you.